Marcus Reed's phone buzzed against the center console as he pulled into the Bellevue parking lot. The text glowed harsh against the October darkness. Sorry, can't make it tonight. Hope you have a good evening. 3 years. 3 years since Sarah died, and it took Danny, his 9-year-old son, practically shoving him out the door to even download the dating app. The kid had looked up from his astronomy homework with those two knowing eyes and announced that Marcus needed to smile more, that he looked sad even when he wasn't, that mom would want him to be happy. Words too wise for someone who still believes socks were foot prisons. Marcus stared at the restaurant through the windshield. Warm light spilled from floor-to-ceiling windows, couples leaning across candlelit tables, the illusion of connection he'd forgotten how to want. His hand moved toward the ignition. Home meant frozen pizza, another night on the couch while Danny built elaborate theories about whether fish could survive in space with water helmets. Another evening of pretending he wasn't still half living in the ghost of his old life. Then his headlights swept across something that made him freeze. A woman sat crumpled beside an Aston Martin, evening dress pooling around her like spilled ink, designer heels abandoned on the asphalt. Her shoulders shook with the kind of crying that came from somewhere deeper than tears, the full-body breakdown of someone who'd been holding it together too long. Marcus should have driven away. Every rational instinct screamed that this wasn't his business, that getting involved with a stranger's crisis at 9 o'clock on a Thursday night was asking for complications he didn't need. But 3 years of grief support groups had taught him to recognize certain things. The way someone folded into themselves when they'd run out of places to hide. The specific quality of aloneness that came from being surrounded by people who didn't actually see you. He killed the engine and stepped out. The October wind carried her expensive perfume mixed with rain. As Marcus approached, she looked up, mascara tracking black rivers down her face. For half a second, her expression twisted between panic and relief. The look of someone drowning who'd just spotted a rope, but wasn't sure if it was real or another hallucination. "Are you okay?" The words came out rougher than intended. She flinched, then seemed to force herself straighter, one hand moving unconsciously to hide the watch on her wrist. Even in the parking lot shadows, Marcus caught the glint of platinum and diamonds, something that probably cost more than his annual take-home from Reed HVAC services. "I'm fine." Her voice cracked on the word, the lie so transparent it was almost insulting. "Sorry, I just need a minute." Marcus glanced around the empty lot. 9 at night. Temperature dropping fast. This woman in her $1,000 dress and bare feet, crying alone next to a car that probably cost more than his house. He thought about the hospital where Sarah had died, all those expensive machines that couldn't fix what actually mattered, and something in his chest twisted. "I'm not trying to be a hero or anything." He kept his distance, hands visible, non-threatening. "But this is a dark parking lot, and you're crying by yourself. I'll wait in my truck. Make sure you're safe, won't bother you." She studied him with red-rimmed eyes, really looked, and Marcus saw the calculation happen. That moment when someone decides whether to trust a stranger or keep drowning alone. He'd lived that moment himself, standing outside the grief support group Mrs. Chen had dragged him to 6 months after the funeral, wondering if it was worth walking through the door or if he should just keep carrying the weight until it crushed him. Why? She managed to get the word out steady despite the tears still running. Marcus thought about Sarah's voice, the things she used to say when she'd bring soup to sick neighbors or help Mrs. Patterson down the block with her yard work, even when the chemo made her so tired she could barely stand. Kindness doesn't cost anything, and the world needs more of it. "My wife used to say kindness was free," he told this stranger in a parking lot, "and I forgot that for too long after she died." The admission surprised him, but something about this woman's broken elegance made honesty feel safer than small talk, made the usual social scripts feel inadequate to the moment. "I'm Marcus." He didn't move closer, just offered the words. "I was supposed to have a blind date tonight, but she canceled, so I'm not exactly having a great time either." She wiped at her face, smearing the mascara worse. For a long moment, she just stood there, this creature of obvious wealth and obvious pain, backlit by the Aston Martin's running lights. Then something shifted in her posture, like she'd made a decision that scared her. "Catherine." Just the name, clipped and careful. "Don't ask for more." Marcus nodded. They stood in the strange silence of two people who'd stumbled into each other's disasters, the restaurant's warm glow mocking them from 50 yards away. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. Catherine flinched at the sound. That restaurant. She pointed toward Bellevue with a hand that trembled. That's where you were meeting her? Yeah. She laughed, sharp and bitter. Me too. The world tilted. Marcus looked at his phone, at the dating profile photo. Cat, 32, likes art and travel. Then at the woman in front of him. His brain tried to process it. She'd canceled on him. While he was getting the text, she'd been right here, 20 yards away, falling apart. He couldn't finish the sentence. I'm the one who canceled. Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. I saw your profile picture with your son, and I got scared. I don't know how to do families. Don't know how to be around people who have their lives together enough to raise a human being. The raw honesty hit harder than any apology could have. Marcus thought about Danny at home with Mrs. Chen, probably still awake even though it was past bedtime, wondering if his dad was having fun, if this meant Marcus might stop looking so sad all the time. My son thinks I need to smile more. The words came out before Marcus could stop them. Says I look sad even when I'm not trying to be. Catherine's expression softened, some of the defensive panic bleeding out. Smart kid. She bent to retrieve her shoes and wobbled. Marcus caught her elbow on instinct. The watch caught the light again. Definitely platinum, definitely diamonds. Definitely not something a normal person wore to a blind date. She pulled away fast, but not before he felt how cold her skin was. I should go. But she didn't move, just stood there staring at the restaurant with naked longing. Have you eaten? She shook her head. Marcus's stomach chose that moment to growl, loud enough to echo in the quiet lot. Catherine laughed, really laughed this time. The sound startled out of her. I haven't either. He gestured at the space between them, this bizarre situation they'd created. And honestly, going home to tell my kid I ate frozen pizza alone sounds worse than whatever this is. She studied him like he was a puzzle she couldn't solve. You don't know me. I could be anyone. Yeah, Marcus shrugged. But you're crying in a parking lot because you were too scared to meet someone. That tells me more than a dating profile ever could. The words hung between them, honest and unkind. Catherine's jaw tightened, then something shifted. She took a breath, squared her shoulders inside his too large jacket, and after what felt like an eternity, nodded once. One meal, then I disappear. Marcus offered his arm, old-fashioned. She hesitated, then took it. Her hand was still cold, but she let him lead her toward the warm lights and the illusion that two broken people could share a meal without everything falling apart. Inside, the hostess took in Catherine's bare feet and tear-stained face, Marcus's rumpled work shirt that still smelled faintly of refrigerant. Professional mask firmly in place, she checked the reservation book. Reservation for Reed. They were led to a corner booth. Catherine slid in with her back to the room, hiding. The menu was leather-bound, the kind of place Marcus wouldn't normally choose on an HVAC technician's budget. Catherine didn't open hers, just stared at the white tablecloth like it held answers. The contrast struck him hard. She looked at home in this expensive restaurant, the way she held herself, the unconscious grace even in devastation, but utterly lost in her own skin. Tell me about your son. The request came abruptly, almost desperately. Marcus blinked, caught off guard. Most women on first dates glazed over when he mentioned Danny, clearly calculating whether they wanted to deal with someone else's kid. But Catherine's voice carried genuine hunger, like she was using the question as armor against something worse. He pulled out his phone. Danny grinned gap-toothed from the screen, arms wrapped around his science fair project, a model of the solar system with hand-painted planets. Danny's 9, smart as hell, talks like a philosopher. Last week he asked me if time is relative. Does that mean grief moves faster for some people than others? He scrolled to another photo, Danny at the coast with Sarah the summer before she got sick. Catherine leaned forward, studying the image with surprising intensity. He looks happy. Wistful, almost wounded. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He is. Took a while after his mom died, but yeah, he's good now. He said it plainly, not seeking pity, just stating fact. Catherine's eyes widened, then filled with understanding that went deeper than sympathy. I'm sorry. Just that, no follow-up questions or awkward platitudes. Marcus appreciated the restraint. Instead of pushing, she reached across the table, finger tracing the phone screen where Danny smiled. He has your eyes, but better laugh lines. The unexpected observation pulled a real smile from Marcus. The waiter materialized before he could respond, young guy in pressed black, radiating board efficiency. Catherine ordered without looking at the menu, voice steady now. She'd composed herself. The crying woman replaced by someone who knew expensive restaurants, the way Marcus knew pressure differentials and refrigerant cycles. But he caught how her hands shook, reaching for the water glass, how she kept glancing at the exit like she was calculating escape routes. After the waiter left, Marcus leaned forward. So are you going to tell me why you were really crying? Bold, maybe too bold. Catherine's fingers tightened around her glass until the knuckles went white. If I tell you, you'll either think I'm crazy or you'll look at me differently. Either way, this ends. Marcus had learned patience from grief, the kind that came from sitting with pain long enough to understand it didn't respond to rushing. Then don't tell me yet. Tell me something else instead, whatever you want me to know. Giving her the choice felt right. Catherine stared at him for a long moment, then slowly, carefully, began. I used to have a dog. Her voice went soft, distant. Big golden retriever named Copper. Dumbest, sweetest thing. Used to steal socks and hide them under my bed. I'd find dozens of them, all mismatched, like he was building a nest. A sad smile ghosted across her face. My father made me give him away when I was 12. Said I needed to focus on becoming someone important, not wasting time on animals that would just die anyway. The way she said someone important dripped with bitterness so old it had calcified into permanent damage. I still think about that dog. Wonder if his new family let him steal socks. Wonder if they loved him the way I couldn't. Marcus felt understanding shift and lock into place. The expensive watch, the luxury car, the fear of families. It was starting to make sense. Not just rich, but something else. Something that taught people achievement mattered more than connection. For what it's worth, he said carefully, Danny has a rule in our house. No socks because they're foot prisons. We're a barefoot family now. Catherine repeated foot prisons and laughed, really laughed. The sound transformed her face, years falling away to reveal someone younger, less burdened. God, I can't remember the last time someone made me laugh about something that simple. She wiped her eyes, mascara smearing again. Your son sounds wonderful. Marcus heard the hunger in it, yearning for something she'd never had, something money couldn't buy. Their food arrived. They ate slowly, conversation flowing easier now. Catherine asked about his work, seemed genuinely interested in the mechanics of HVAC systems, the satisfaction of fixing something broken and making it run right again. Marcus asked about hers and got vague answers about consulting, about traveling, about a life that sounded glamorous and desperately lonely. He told her about Danny's space obsession, the kid's theory that if you traveled fast enough, you could catch up to light from dead stars and see the past. Catherine listened with rare attention, the kind that made you feel heard instead of just waited at. When she smiled at his stories, her whole face changed, the mask slipping to reveal the real person underneath. Can I ask you something? Marcus nodded. Why did you come over in the parking lot? Most people would have driven away. He considered the question, thought about Sarah in the hospital, how she'd kept apologizing for dying even though there was nothing to apologize for, how she'd made him promise to live after she was gone, to let Danny see him happy again. When Sarah was sick, she used to say kindness was free and the world needed more of it. After she died, I forgot that for a long time. Got so wrapped up in just surviving that I stopped seeing other people. He met Catherine's eyes. But Danny reminded me. Kids see someone sad, he asks if they're okay. Makes me want to be better. Catherine was quiet for a long moment, then reached across and took his hand. Her fingers were warm now, steady. Thank you for not driving away. Marcus squeezed gently. Thank you for not running when I showed up. They sat like that, hands linked across the table, two strangers who'd stumbled into something neither planned for. It was the first time since Sarah died that Marcus felt connected to another person without the weight of grief crushing everything else. The feeling scared him, how much he didn't want this night to end, how much Catherine's smile felt like waking up from something he hadn't realized he was sleeping through. When they left the restaurant, Catherine walked beside him barefoot again, designer heels dangling from one hand. The parking lot was darker now, most diners gone home. Only their two vehicles remained. Marcus's work truck with its faded paint and dented bumper, Catherine's Aston Martin gleaming like a spaceship. "I should drive you." Marcus gestured at her car. "You're upset and it's late." She shook her head but didn't move toward the vehicle. Just stood under the streetlight, vulnerable in a way that made his chest ache. Somewhere distant, a dog barked. Catherine flinched hard. "Can I see you again?" The question came out rougher than Marcus intended. Catherine looked at him with complicated emotion. Fear and hope and grief all tangled together. "I don't know if that's a good idea. I'm not in a good place to be around people, especially people with kids who have their lives figured out." Marcus thought about her story of the dog, the father who valued achievement over love. "Danny's pretty independent. I'm just talking about coffee, just seeing where this goes." She bit her lip, fighting with herself. The internal war played across her face, every emotion visible. "One more time. Coffee." She took a breath. "But Marcus, I'm not who you think I am. My life is complicated. If we do this, there are things you'll find out that might make you wish you'd driven away tonight." Warning and plea. Marcus heard both. He thought about playing it safe, about the easier path of going home and deleting the dating app and telling Danny the world wasn't ready for them yet. But he also thought about Catherine's laugh when he'd said foot prisons, the way she'd listened to stories about his dead wife without flinching, the loneliness in her eyes that mirrored his own. Everyone's complicated. He met her gaze, held it. "I've got a dead wife, a kid who thinks he can talk to stars by memorizing constellations, and a bank account that scares me every month. You've got whatever you've got. Maybe we're both a mess. Or maybe we're just people who ended up in the same parking lot on the same night. Either way, I'd like to see you again." Catherine's eyes shimmered with tears that didn't fall. "You don't know what you're saying yes to." "Probably not," Marcus shrugged. "But I said yes to a blind date tonight and she canceled. Sometimes not knowing works out okay." They exchanged numbers, her fingers shaking as she typed. She saved herself as just V, not even her full name, like she was already protecting herself from whatever came next. "I'll text you," Marcus promised. She nodded, backing toward her car. "Marcus." His name stopped him halfway to the truck. He turned. She stood under the parking lot lights, barefoot and beautiful and broken in equal measure. "Your wife was right about kindness. Tell Danny he's lucky to have you." Then she drove away, the Aston Martin's taillights disappearing into Portland traffic. The drive home blurred past, Marcus replaying every moment. By the time he pulled into his driveway, he'd nearly convinced himself it had been some kind of fever dream, exhaustion and loneliness creating a woman in a parking lot who understood grief without needing it, explained. His phone buzzed. "Unknown number. Thank you for tonight. I mean it." Marcus stared at the words for a full minute before typing back. "Thank you for not running. Sleep well." Inside, Danny was sprawled on the couch, supposedly asleep but clearly faking. Mrs. Chen looked up from her book, eyebrows raised in question. "How'd it go?" Marcus thought about the answer. "Weird, but good weird, maybe." The older woman smiled, decades of wisdom in the expression. "That's usually the best kind." After she left, Marcus carried Danny to bed. The kid was heavier than last year, growing too fast. Soon he'd be too big to carry, would want his independence, would stop asking Marcus to check for monsters under the bed, even though they both knew monsters lived in grief, not closets. "Met someone interesting tonight, buddy," he whispered into Danny's hair. "Not sure what happens next, but I think your mom would have liked her." The next days fell into strange rhythm. Marcus texted Catherine each morning, simple messages, nothing heavy. She responded sporadically, like she was arguing with herself about whether to answer, but she always responded eventually. Thursday morning, "Danny wants to know if fish could survive in space with water helmets." Her reply came 2 hours later. "Your son asks the important questions. What's the answer?" "Probably not, but I love that he wonders. Me too. Saturday, he suggested coffee. She agreed after a pause long enough he thought she'd say no. They met at a small place near Washington Park. Catherine arrived exactly on time, dressed down in jeans and a sweater that still probably cost more than his entire wardrobe, but looked almost normal. She walked in nervous, shoulders tense, scanning the room like she expected threat. Hi. Hi back. Some of the tension left her. They ordered, hers black, his loaded with cream and sugar, and found a table by the window. Conversation started awkward, both of them feeling out the shape of whatever this was. Then Danny called, breathless with urgency. Dad, can fish survive in space if they have water helmets? Probably not, buddy, but it's a good question. When he hung up, Catherine was watching him with that expression, part longing, part something darker. He calls you midday to ask about space fish. Marcus shrugged, embarrassed. It's our thing. He has questions. He calls. Catherine's eyes went shimmery. My father never answered his phone, too busy building an empire to talk about fish or anything else that didn't advance the bottom line. She said it lightly, but Marcus heard the old wound underneath, still bleeding after all these years. Your dad sounds like he was an asshole. Catherine choked on her coffee, laughing so hard tears ran. Yeah, actually accurate. God, you just say things. They talked for 2 hours, coffee going cold. Catherine never explained what she did for work, but she told him about places she traveled. Tokyo, Barcelona, Stockholm. Languages she spoke, a life that sounded like magazine spreads and desperately lonely nights. She mentioned boarding schools, summers at houses in places Marcus would never see, a childhood of privilege that sounded like its own kind of poverty. Do you have friends? Her face shuddered. Not really. People know who I am, but they don't know me. There's a difference. Marcus understood that difference intimately. After Sarah died, dozens of people had shown up with casseroles and sympathy, but most of them disappeared once the funeral ended. Only Mrs. Chen and Tommy from work had stayed, had kept showing up even when Marcus was at his worst. They started seeing each other regularly after that. Coffee turned into lunch. Lunch turned into park walks where Danny would join, running ahead to investigate interesting rocks or describe the molecular structure of clouds he'd learned about in school. The first time Danny met her, he studied Catherine with unnerving intensity, then announced, You have sad eyes like Dad used to, but you smile real, so that's good. Catherine looked stunned, then crouched to his level. You have smart eyes like you see things other people miss. Danny beamed, chest puffing with pride. From that moment, he adopted her completely, dragging her to see his rock collection and explain his theory that if you could fold space, you could visit yesterday and tell yourself to be happier. Marcus watched them together with joy and terror warring in his chest. Danny hadn't connected with anyone like this since Sarah died. If whatever Marcus and Catherine were building fell apart, his son would be devastated. But warning signs appeared, small things that accumulated. Catherine never let him pick her up. They always met at public places. She dodged questions about her family, her past, anything revealing. Once at the park, a photographer walking their dog looked at Catherine and pulled out their phone. She turned away fast, hiding her face. Paparazzi make me nervous, she explained, voice thin. Marcus let it go, but the explanation didn't quite make sense. Her phone rang constantly, calls she never answered in front of him, always excusing herself to take them somewhere private. And there was the money thing, the way she never looked at prices, never hesitated at expensive choices, like she existed in a different economic universe than his paycheck-to-paycheck reality. 6 weeks in, Marcus stood at his kitchen table at 2 a.m, Danny asleep upstairs, and typed Catherine's name into Google with fingers that felt like betrayal. The results made his blood run cold. Catherine Monroe, billionaire heiress, daughter of tech mogul Richard Monroe, missing from public life for 10 months, last seen at a gala in March before disappearing from society completely. Photos showed a different woman, perfectly styled, standing beside senators and CEOs, wearing clothes that cost more than cars. But the eyes were the same, that sad, haunted look he'd recognized in the parking lot. Articles detailed the Monroe Technologies empire, Richard Monroe's reputation as a ruthless businessman, speculation about why his daughter had vanished. Some mentioned a breakdown. Others hinted at family conflict. All agreed that Catherine Monroe was worth billions in her own right through trust funds and inheritance. Marcus sat there trying to process. She wasn't just wealthy, she was wealth itself, old money and new money combined. The kind of person who existed on a different plane from people who worried about mortgage payments and whether they could afford Danny's orthodontist. She'd been lying, or hiding truth, which amounted to the same thing. He thought about Danny, how attached the kid had gotten. Thought about the woman crying beside a car she could buy 100 times over. Thought about the gulf between their worlds, vast and uncrossable. Question was, confront her or walk away? Could whatever this was survive secrets and class differences so large they might as well be from different planets? He called her. Catherine answered on the second ring, voice bright. Hey, I was just thinking about you. Marcus's stomach twisted with guilt and anger. We need to talk, in person. The silence told him she knew. When she spoke again, all the brightness had drained away. You looked me up. Yeah, long pause. Can you come to my place? I'll text the address. I think it's time you saw everything. The building was everything he'd expected and worse. Sleek glass and steel in downtown Portland. The kind of place with a doorman who looked at Marcus's truck like it was contaminating the neighborhood. The elevator to the penthouse required a key card, felt like ascending to another world entirely. When the doors opened directly into her apartment, Marcus stepped into Architectural Digest made real. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city lights, art that was probably worth more than his house, furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Everything expensive, elegant, perfect, and completely impersonal. No photos, no clutter, no life. A hotel suite, not a home. Catherine stood in the middle of it all, still in the same jeans and sweater from their last coffee date, looking small and out of place in her own space. So, she didn't move toward him. Now you know. Marcus walked deeper into the apartment slowly, taking in the evidence of wealth he couldn't quite comprehend. Everything spoke of money in amounts that made his working-class background feel like a different species. Why didn't you tell me? Catherine laughed, that bitter parking lot laugh. Because this is what happens. I tell people who I am, and suddenly I'm not a person anymore. I'm a bank account, a connection, a way to get something. You saw me that night because you didn't know. If you'd known in the parking lot, would you have approached me? Marcus thought about that, forced himself to honesty. If he'd known she was Catherine Monroe, billionaire heiress, would he have walked over? Probably not. He would have assumed she had people, resources, that someone like him had nothing to offer someone like her. I wouldn't have talked to you, he admitted, would have thought you didn't need help. Catherine nodded, vindicated. Exactly. But I did need help. So badly. I was crying because I couldn't make myself walk into that restaurant and pretend to be normal for 2 hours. Couldn't make myself go through the motions one more time. She moved to the windows, city lights painting her face in neon and shadow. My father built an empire. My mother maintained our image. And I learned that love was transactional, that people wanted access, not connection, that trust was weakness and vulnerability was currency. She turned, tears streaming. Until some HVAC technician in a parking lot offered me kindness without knowing who I was, without wanting anything except to make sure I was safe. Marcus closed the distance, took her hands. They were cold again, like in the parking lot. I'm not a saint. I'm a guy who fixes air conditioners. I don't know how to navigate your world. This, he gestured at the penthouse, the city, the evidence of wealth beyond comprehension. This isn't my life. I live in a 3-bedroom house in Southeast Portland with a stained couch and bills I struggle to pay sometimes. Catherine shook her head. It's not mine either. This is my father's life, his expectations, his vision, his empire that I never wanted. I hate the galas, the fake friends who want proximity to power. I hate that I can't go outside without worrying someone will photograph me, that every interaction is calculated, that I gave away my dog because someone said achievement mattered more than love. Her voice broke. I canceled that date because I saw Danny in your profile and thought, I'll ruin this kid. Because everyone I touch gets damaged by proximity to Richard Monroe's daughter. Marcus pulled her closer, felt her shake. You haven't ruined anything. Danny adores you. You listen to him in ways most adults don't bother with. You read his space books with different voices and take his questions seriously, and you don't get weird when he talks about his mom. Catherine pulled back. I don't know how to be normal. Don't know how to have relationships that aren't about power or money or obligation. My father, she looked toward the windows, he's going to find out about you, about Danny. And when he does, he'll try to destroy it. That's what he does to anything I care about. Let him try. The anger surprised Marcus. I'm not scared of your father. But even saying it, he felt the weight of the lie. He was scared. Not of Richard Monroe himself, but of what this revelation meant. The gap between their worlds felt insurmountable. The differences too vast to bridge with good intentions. Catherine must have seen the doubt because she pulled her hands away, wrapped her arms around herself. You should go. This was a mistake. I should have stayed in that parking lot. I don't want to go. But Marcus didn't move toward her either. They stood in her expensive apartment with the city glittering behind her, strangers again despite everything. I like you, Catherine. More than I thought I could like anyone after Sarah died. He forced the words out. But I have Danny to think about. And this, it's complicated in ways I didn't sign up for. You lied to me or hid truth. And I get why, but I can't build something real on secrets and class differences so big they might as well be mountain ranges. The words came out harsher than he'd intended, but they were true. Catherine nodded slowly. I know, I'm sorry for lying, for hiding. You deserve better than someone who's too broken to be honest. They stood in silence, the weight of everything unsaid crushing down. Finally, Marcus moved toward the elevator. I need to think. It's a lot. Catherine didn't try to stop him. I understand. Tell Danny I'm sorry. Marcus stepped into the elevator. As the doors began closing, he saw her standing alone in that perfect empty apartment, looking smaller than she had in the parking lot, and wondered if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. Danny knew something was wrong the moment Marcus walked through the door. Where's Kat? His face fell when Marcus said she wasn't coming over. Did I do something wrong? The question shattered Marcus's heart. No, buddy, nothing like that. It's grown-up stuff. Danny crossed his arms, looking so much like Sarah it hurt. That's what you said when Mom got sick. But it wasn't grown-up stuff. It was her dying. The accusation hung in the air, brutal and accurate. Marcus sat heavily on the couch. Danny climbed up beside him, waiting with the patience he'd learned from loss. Kat's different than I thought, Marcus began. She comes from a really different world than us. A lot of money, a lot of pressure, and I'm not sure we fit in that world, or if trying to fit will hurt you in the long run. Danny frowned, processing. But she fits in our world. She likes foot prisons and spacefish questions. She doesn't care that our couch has that stain. She just likes us. Out of the mouths of children, Marcus felt the simplicity of it cut through his fear. It's more complicated than that, Dan. Is it? Danny challenged. And for a moment, Marcus saw Sarah in him so clearly it took his breath away. Or are you scared? Like how Kat was scared in the parking lot, but you helped her anyway. Maybe she needs help now. Marcus looked at his son, this 9-year-old who saw the world with clarity adults had lost somewhere along the way. When did you get so smart? Danny shrugged. Mom always said love was being brave. You have to be scared and do it anyway. That's what makes it brave instead of just easy. He leaned against Marcus's side. I miss her. Kat, I mean. She reads the space books with different voices, and she listens when I talk about Mom. Doesn't get weird like other grown-ups do. Marcus wrapped his arm around his son. What if her dad is mean? What if he doesn't like us because we're not rich? Then we deal with it. Danny said it like it was obvious. Together. That's what families do. Marcus heard himself in his son's words, heard Sarah's philosophy filtered through grief and resilience. So we're not giving up. Families don't give up on each other. Danny looked up at it. Kat's family now, even if she's scared and even if her dad is mean. You taught me that. You said family is who shows up, not just who shares DNA. Marcus thought about Catherine alone in that penthouse, about the woman crying in a parking lot who needed kindness more than she'd ever admit. about Sarah's voice telling him to live, to let Danny see him choose connection over fear. You're right. He pulled Danny closer. We're not giving up, but I need to talk to Kat first, really talk. Figure out if we can make this work, even with all the complicated stuff. Danny grinned. Tell her we don't care about her dad's money. Tell her we just want her. Simple for kids. Maybe it should be that simple for adults too. Marcus texted Catherine that night. Can we talk? Really talk? Her response came almost immediately, like she'd been waiting. Yes, please. They agreed to meet the next day at the coffee shop. Marcus picked Danny up early from school. We're going to see Kat? Danny asked, bouncing. Maybe. We're going to try. When they walked into the coffee shop, Catherine was already there, sitting in the corner booth where she could see the door. Marcus's breath caught. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, hair less carefully arranged than usual. But when she saw Danny, her whole face transformed. The kid ran to her, threw his arms around her waist. I missed you. Catherine's hands hovered for a heartbeat before settling on his shoulders, her eyes meeting Marcus's over Danny's head. The naked vulnerability in her expression, hope and fear and desperate longing, made Marcus certain they were making the right choice, complicated or not. I missed you too, sweetheart, more than you know. They sat together, Danny between them, and Marcus felt the rightness of it settle into his bones despite everything. I'm sorry, Catherine started. Marcus shook his head. We both are, but Danny reminded me of something. He reached across, took her hand. Sarah used to say love required being brave, that it meant being scared and doing it anyway. He looked at their joined hands, then at Catherine's face. I think whatever this is between us, it's worth being brave for. Worth fighting for even when it's complicated and scary. Catherine's eyes filled with tears. Danny reached over, patted her hand with the solemnity of someone far older than 9. It's okay to cry. Dad cries sometimes too. She laughed through the tears, squeezing Danny's hand. Your son is the wisest person I've ever met. He gets it from his mom, Marcus replied. But yeah, he's pretty special. He leaned forward. Look, I don't know how to do this. Dating a billionaire wasn't in my life plan. But Danny's right. You fit with us. You fit in a way nobody else has since Sarah died. So maybe we figure it out as we go. Together. Catherine wiped her eyes. My father is going to lose his mind. An HVAC technician with a kid doesn't fit his plans for me at all. So we deal with your father when we have to, Marcus said. Together. He reached across, took both her hands in his. They were warm now, steady. I'm not rich. I can't give you the life you're used to. But I can promise you honesty, real connection, and a kid who already loves you. If that's enough. Catherine looked at their joined hands, then at Danny's hopeful face, then back at Marcus. It's more than enough, her voice broke. It's everything. Danny whooped loud enough to draw stares from other customers and threw his arms around both of them, pulling them into an awkward three-way hug. Marcus caught Catherine's eye over Danny's head and saw his own relief reflected back. They'd made it through the first crisis. Now came everything else, the real test of whether love could survive across worlds so different they might as well be foreign countries. But sitting in that coffee shop, with Catherine's hand in his and Danny's joy bubbling over, Marcus thought maybe it could. Maybe being brave was enough. Maybe kindness in a parking lot could turn into something real, despite the odds. They left together, Danny between them holding both their hands, and for the first time since Sarah died, Marcus felt like they might actually be a family again. Different, rebuilt from broken pieces, but real. The weeks that followed moved in rhythms Marcus hadn't experienced since before Sarah's diagnosis. Catherine started appearing at the house in southeast Portland with increasing frequency, slipping into their routines like she'd always been there. The modest 3-bedroom with its scuffed hardwood floors and perpetually cluttered kitchen became something different when she walked through the door. Not just a place where Marcus and Danny survived, but somewhere they were learning to live again. She showed up on a Tuesday evening with grocery bags and announced she was making dinner. Danny immediately appointed himself sous chef, dragging a step stool to the counter, while Marcus watched from the doorway, caught between amusement and apprehension. The smoke alarm went off 17 minutes later. Catherine stood before the stove, wooden spoon raised like a weapon, staring at the pan of what had been intended as marinara sauce, but now resembled volcanic ash. Smoke billowed toward the ceiling, while Danny collapsed against the refrigerator, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. I genuinely did not know tomatoes could become charcoal. Catherine's voice carried bewilderment rather than embarrassment. That seems like something someone should have mentioned. Marcus grabbed a dish towel, waving it at the shrieking detector while trying not to laugh. Danny had given up entirely, sliding down the fridge to sit on the floor, tears streaming. "Pizza?" the kid managed between gasps. Catherine looked at the ruined pan, then at Danny's delighted face, then at Marcus still battling the smoke alarm. Something shifted in her expression. Wonder almost at the simple chaos of a kitchen disaster. "Pizza," she agreed, and her smile carried more genuine happiness than Marcus had ever seen at the penthouse. They ordered from the place Danny liked, the one that put too much cheese on everything. Catherine sat cross-legged on the living room floor, slice in hand, while Danny explained his latest theory about wormholes. She listened with the focused intensity Marcus had come to recognize, asking questions that showed she'd actually absorbed everything he'd said before. This version of her, flour still dusted in her hair from the bread she tried making last weekend, comfortable in borrowed sweats because she'd forgotten to bring change of clothes, felt more real than the polished woman in the penthouse, like someone finally inhabiting their own skin. The cooking lessons became ritual. Every Sunday, Catherine and Danny attempted something new while Marcus supervised from the kitchen table, ready to intervene if flames became involved. Spaghetti carbonara ended with eggs scrambled into pasta. Cookies emerged from the oven, either raw in the center or burnt on the edges, never both cooked correctly. A misguided attempt at homemade bread produced something closer to a brick than food. But Danny didn't care about results. He cared about Catherine's attention, the way she treated his suggestions seriously, how she high-fived him after every disaster like they'd accomplished something magnificent together. Neighbors started noticing. Miss Chen mentioned seeing Catherine's car parked overnight. Tommy Briggs raised an eyebrow when Marcus mentioned her during a job, but said nothing beyond a knowing grunt. The Rodriguez family, 3 doors down, invited all 3 of them to their daughter's quinceañera. Catherine went stiff when Marcus relayed the invitation. Social events with strangers, expectations she didn't know how to meet, the risk of being recognized. "They don't know who I am," she said carefully. "What if someone figures it out?" "Then they figure it out," Marcus shrugged. "The Rodriguezes care about whether you're nice to their kid, not what your bank account looks like." She went, wore a simple dress from Target that Danny had helped pick out, spent most of the party in the corner with the younger kids, teaching them a clapping game she'd learned at boarding school. When Maria Rodriguez sought her out specifically to thank her for entertaining the little ones, Catherine's expression flickered through confusion before settling into something that might have been gratitude. "No one asked about my family," she told Marcus on the drive home, Danny asleep in the back seat. "No one wanted anything from me. They were just nice." The wonder in her voice broke something in Marcus's chest. This woman worth billions had never experienced a neighborhood party where people were simply kind because kindness was the point. Marcus got his first taste of her world at a charity gala she couldn't avoid, something about board obligations, appearances that had to be maintained to protect certain business interests. She'd looked ill when she mentioned it, but insisted he come. He rented a tuxedo that didn't quite fit, felt like an imposter from the moment the valet looked at his truck with barely concealed disdain. The venue was a converted warehouse in the Pearl District, all exposed brick and designer lighting, packed with people who moved through the space like they owned it, because most of them probably did. Catherine stayed close, her hand on his arm, navigating the crowd with practiced ease. But Marcus watched her face and saw the performance. The smile that never reached her eyes, the laugh calibrated to appropriate warmth, the way she deflected personal questions with the skill of someone who'd been doing it since childhood. This wasn't living, this was surviving in designer clothing. A man approached them near the bar, older, silver-haired, with the kind of tan that came from winters in places Marcus couldn't afford to imagine. He had Catherine's eyes, the shape, the color, but none of the warmth she'd developed over the past weeks. Where her gaze held vulnerability, his held calculation. "So you're the mechanic my daughter's been hiding." The voice dripped condescension. Marcus felt Catherine's grip tighten on his arm. HVAC technician, actually. And you're the father who made her give away her dog because love wasn't productive enough. The temperature around them dropped. Nearby conversations stuttered. Richard Monroe's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went flat and dangerous. Catherine has told you about ancient history, I see. She was a child who needed to learn discipline. Sentimentality is a weakness in our world. Marcus felt his jaw clench. She was a kid who needed to feel loved. There's a difference between discipline and cruelty. Richard Monroe's gaze swept over Marcus. The rented tux, the calloused hands, the complete absence of wealth or influence, and dismissed him entirely. We'll speak later, Catherine, about your choices and their consequences. He walked away, absorbed immediately into a cluster of people who looked at him with the deference usually reserved for royalty. I cannot believe you said that. Catherine's voice was breathless. Did you see his face? He's a bully. Marcus kept his voice steady despite his racing heart. Bullies expect people to back down. Most of the time, they don't know what to do when someone doesn't. Catherine laughed, slightly wild. You just called my father a bully to his face, at a charity gala, in front of the Portland business elite. She pulled him toward the exit before he could respond, and they didn't stop until they reached his truck in the parking garage. Only then did Marcus notice his hands were shaking. He'd made an enemy of one of the most powerful men in the Pacific Northwest. Over a woman he'd known for barely 2 months. For a relationship that might not survive the weight of their differences. But looking at Catherine's face, the mix of terror and exhilaration, the gratitude that someone had finally stood up to the man who'd controlled her entire life, Marcus knew he'd do it again. Richard Monroe moved faster than Marcus anticipated. Within 2 weeks, half his contracts evaporated. Companies he'd worked with for years suddenly found other providers. The property management firm that gave him most of his steady income called with regrets. Budget cuts, they said, nothing personal. But Marcus recognized the lie. 3 other clients followed the same week with similar excuses. He sat at the kitchen table at midnight. Statements spread before him like a crime scene. $847 in checking. Rent coming due. Danny's school supply list for next semester. The truck needed new tires before winter, and the furnace in the basement had been making sounds that suggested expensive failure. Tommy Briggs helped where he could, passing along jobs when they came up, but the math was brutal. Marcus picked up evening work, weekend calls, emergency repairs, anything to stop the bleeding. He came home exhausted, fell asleep on the couch still in work clothes, woke before dawn to do it again. Danny noticed. Kids always noticed. Are we poor now? The question came at breakfast, Danny pushing cereal around his bowl instead of eating. Marcus set down his coffee, the weight of the world pressing. We're tight on money, buddy, but we're okay. We've been tight before. Danny processed this, that too-old look settling over his features. Is it because of Kat? Marcus hesitated too long. Danny nodded like the silence confirmed everything. Mom wouldn't have let someone hurt us. The words hit like a physical blow. Sarah, fierce and protective, who'd once threatened to sue a contractor who tried to scam an elderly neighbor. She would have found a way to fight back, would have refused to let someone powerful destroy what they'd built. No, Marcus agreed quietly. She wouldn't have. Catherine showed up the next evening looking like someone Marcus barely recognized. Hair pulled back severe, makeup sharp, wearing a power suit that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage. The transformation was jarring. The soft woman who'd burned marinara replaced by someone armored for war. I went to see my father. Her voice carried edges he'd never heard. Told him to back off, or I go public with every family secret I've spent my life pretending not to notice. The bribes, the buyouts, the way certain regulations got overlooked. He has enemies who would love that information. She met Marcus's eyes. He backed down. Your clients will start calling again. Marcus should have felt relief. Instead, unease crawled through him. What did it cost you? Catherine's armor cracked slightly. He wants me back, in the business, in public life. He thinks this is all negotiation, that I'll get bored of playing house and return to my proper position. She laughed, hollow. He doesn't understand. I'd rather burn money than go back to being his asset. Marcus took her hands. The expensive watch was back on her wrist, platinum and diamonds catching kitchen light. You don't have to do that. Go back to his world. You've built something here. It's not about the money, Catherine's jaw set. It's about him coming after you, after Danny. I can't walk away completely if I want to protect you from the full force of Richard Monroe's displeasure. He'll destroy anything I care about unless I maintain enough connection to threaten him back. The logic made sense in a terrible way. Mutually assured destruction applied to family relationships. That's not fair to you. Marcus heard the inadequacy of the words. Catherine's expression softened. Fair stopped mattering the moment I fell in love with you. I'd rather spend my life navigating his games than lose what we're building. The words hung between them. First time either had said love directly. Marcus felt the weight of them, the promise and the terror. You love me? Catherine's eyes shimmered. I love both of you. Watching Danny figure out how the world works, the way you make me feel like I'm allowed to take up space without earning it. The fact that you stood up to my father when everyone else just nods and agrees. She swallowed hard. But loving you means protecting you, even if that means going back to being someone I hate. They stood in the kitchen holding each other when Danny's voice came from the hallway. Kat, why are you sad? The kid had abandoned homework, drawn by the heaviness in the air. He crossed to Catherine without hesitation, wrapped his arms around her waist. You don't have to be alone sad. You can be together, sad with us. Catherine crumbled, sinking to Danny's level. How did I get so lucky to meet you? Danny patted her back with the solemn competence of someone who'd learned to comfort adults too early. Dad says Mom sent you, like she knew we'd need someone. Your mom sounds like she was the smartest person. Danny nodded seriously. She said family isn't just blood. It's who shows up. You show up. That makes you family. Catherine looked up at Marcus over Danny's head, tears streaming. Danny's right. Marcus's voice came rough. Your family. We protect family, even from billionaire assholes who think they can buy everyone's submission. Catherine laughed and cried simultaneously. Danny looked pleased with himself for fixing things, unaware of how much his simple wisdom had shifted. That night, they sat at the kitchen table strategizing. Catherine had changed back into borrowed sweats, war paint removed, looking more like herself again. What if you cut ties completely? Marcus suggested. Walk away from all of it. Your father can't hold leverage if you don't care about the money. Catherine shook her head. He'd see that as war. Come after you harder, use every resource to make your life impossible. The only thing that keeps him contained is knowing I can hurt him too. If I have nothing left to lose, he has no reason to hold back. She leaned against him, exhaustion evident. But maybe there's another way. Going public on our terms, telling our story as a fairy tale. Billionaire heiress falls for working class single dad. Make it something people root for. Marcus thought about their private life spread across newspapers, strangers commenting on their relationship, Danny's face potentially splashed across social media. You'd be okay with that? I'd hate it. Catherine's voice was honest. But I'd hate losing you more. My father despises public sentiment. He can't attack a love story without looking like the villain. If we control the narrative, we control the battlefield. The logic was sound, even if the implications made Marcus's stomach clench. What about Danny? We protect him. Catherine's voice went firm. Control how much he's involved. But he's already part of this. Anyone who investigates me will find out about you, about him. Better we tell the story our way. Marcus hated it, but he also saw no better option. Over the next days, he talked to Danny about what might happen. The kid listened with that focused intensity he'd inherited from Sarah. Will it make Kat safe? That's the plan. Danny considered. Then we do it. Family protects family. They found a journalist through Catherine's remaining connections. Sarah Chen, no relation to Mrs. Chen, who worked for the Portland Tribune and had built a reputation on human interest stories that treated subjects with dignity. She met them at the coffee shop, took notes while they asked questions that showed she understood the stakes. The interview took 3 hours. Marcus talked about Sarah, about grief, about building a life as a single father. Catherine talked about growing up in wealth that felt more like prison, about the parking lot breakdown, about discovering that kindness existed without transaction. Danny talked about space fish and foot prisons and how Kat made really bad spaghetti, but he loved her anyway. Sarah Chen photographed them in Washington Park. Candid shots of Danny running ahead, Marcus and Catherine walking hand in hand, the three of them sharing ice cream on a bench. Nothing posed, just life. The article dropped 5 days later with a headline that made Marcus's stomach flip. The billionaire who found love in a parking lot. Social media detonated. The story spread across platforms, shared and reshared, comments piling up faster than anyone could read. People resonated with the fairy tale of it, Cinderella in reverse, the wealthy woman finding happiness with the man who worked with his hands, the little boy who'd lost his mother gaining someone new. "This is my favorite story of the year," one viral tweet proclaimed. "Working class dad, billionaire villain every time." The Portland Tribune's website crashed twice from traffic. National outlets picked up the story. Requests for follow-up interviews flooded in. Catherine declined them all. Richard Monroe issued a terse statement wishing his daughter happiness while noting their different perspectives on appropriate life choices. The subtext was clear to anyone paying attention, but public opinion had turned against him so thoroughly that even his allies stayed quiet. Marcus's phone started ringing. Former clients calling with apologies. Budget situations had improved. They'd love to work with Reed HVAC again. New clients appeared too, people who'd read the article and wanted to support the underdog. Within a week, he had more work than he could handle alone. Catherine was mobbed whenever she went out, strangers wanting photos, expressing support, treating her like a celebrity instead of a person. She handled it with grace that looked effortless from outside. But Marcus saw how it drained her. The attention had accomplished exactly what they'd intended. Richard couldn't attack without becoming the villain of the story, without proving every implicit criticism the article had made. But protection came with cost. The grocery store incident happened 3 weeks after publication. Catherine had gone alone, trying to maintain some normalcy, when a woman recognized her and pulled out a phone. More people gathered. Someone asked for a photo. Someone else wanted to record a video message for their daughter. The crowd grew until Catherine felt trapped. She made it home somehow, walked through Marcus's door, and collapsed. "Every time I leave the house, I'm that woman from the article. I'm a story, not a person. I can't even buy milk without someone asking to document it." Marcus held her, helpless against the invasion they'd invited. They'd won the battle and lost something else, the privacy that made their relationship feel real. Danny found them in the kitchen, Catherine crying against Marcus's chest. Without a word, the kid climbed onto the counter and reached for something on top of the refrigerator. He retrieved a mason jar filled with rolled papers, dust suggesting it hadn't been touched in years. "Mom made these before she got sick." His voice was matter of fact. "Called them emergency truths. Said when things got really bad, we should read one." He unrolled a random paper. Sarah's handwriting, slightly shaky. She'd made these during chemo, Marcus realized, preparing for a future she wouldn't see. The hard thing and the right thing are usually the same thing. That's how you know it matters. Danny looked at Catherine with that too-old wisdom. "Is loving us the right thing, even though it's hard?" Catherine's voice came broken. "Yes, it's the right thing." "Then we figure out the hard parts together." Danny nodded like this resolved in everything. "That's what family does. Mom wrote that in another paper." Marcus felt something break open in his chest. Grief and love and hope tangled together. Sarah's still teaching them even now, her voice reaching across years. "Danny's right. We figure it out. Maybe we need quieter places, time for the story to die down. But we don't give up." Catherine wiped her eyes. "I'm not used to hard things still being worth fighting for. In my world, hard meant wrong. Meant you'd made a mistake." Marcus pulled her closer. "In my world, hard means you care enough to keep going. The easy things aren't worth much. It's the stuff you have to work for that matters." They built new routines in the weeks that followed. Weekends at Marcus's house became sacred. Cooking experiments, board games Danny always found a way to win, space documentaries that Catherine actually found fascinating. She learned their rhythms. Saturday pancakes with too much syrup, Sunday parks when crowds thinned, bedtime stories where she did all the voices. Slowly, in the privacy of their small world, something transformed. Not Catherine becoming a different person, but becoming more fully herself, the version that existed beneath the armor she'd worn for 32 years. 4 months after the article, an envelope arrived at Catherine's penthouse. Still her legal address, though she barely spent time there anymore. Expensive paper, law firm letterhead, her father's attorneys. The letter was 3 pages of legal language that boiled down to simple cruelty. Richard Monroe was cutting his daughter off completely. No family money, no trust fund access, no shares in Monroe Technologies, no inheritance, nothing. A final paragraph noted that the door remained open should she choose to resume her proper responsibilities and discontinue her experimental lifestyle. Catherine's hands shook as she showed Marcus. I knew he'd do something. I just didn't think. She couldn't finish. Marcus read the cold precision of the language. Lawyers earning their fees by making abandonment sound reasonable. How bad is this? Catherine bit her lip. I have personal savings, investments I made separately from family money, around $2.5 million. She saw his expression. I know that sounds like a lot, but in my world it's starting over. I'll need to find a job, move somewhere smaller, actually budget for the first time in my life. Her voice cracked. I don't even know how to budget. Someone's always handled that for me. Marcus pulled her close. Then we teach you. Danny and I are experts at making $5 feel like 20. We'll figure it out together. He leaned back to look at her face. Maybe this is actually freedom. No strings connecting you to him. No leverage he can hold. Just you, living your own life, making your own choices. Catherine's eyes searched his. You're not upset? I'm bringing chaos into everything, drama and complications, and a father who wants to destroy anything I care about. Your family. Marcus kept his voice steady. Family doesn't get cut loose because things get complicated. Family is who sticks around when it's hard. The words settled between them, simple and true. Catherine moved out of the penthouse the following month, found a 2-bedroom apartment in Laurelhurst, 15 minutes from Marcus's place. The contrast was almost comical. 2,000 square feet instead of 8,000. Street parking instead of a private garage. A kitchen where you could touch both walls simultaneously. Moving day was chaos. Danny ran between boxes with energy that never seemed to deplete. Marcus assembled furniture from instructions that seemed deliberately designed to confuse. Catherine sorted through possessions accumulated over a lifetime, deciding what mattered. Most of the designer clothes went to donation. The expensive furniture sold or given away. She kept books, hundreds of them, fiction and poetry and philosophy, kept meaningful art, pieces she'd actually chosen rather than displays of wealth, kept hidden photos from childhood, herself at 8 with Copper the golden retriever, both of them grinning at the camera, her mother at a rare genuine moment, laughing at something off-frame, nothing of her father. The apartment came together slowly. Bookshelves from IKEA that took Marcus 4 hours to assemble. Curtains Catherine picked out herself for the first time in her life. Danny's drawings from school, taped to the refrigerator like they belonged there. Catherine stood in her new living room that evening, surrounded by boxes still waiting to be unpacked, and cried. It's perfect. The words came through tears. It's actually mine, not my father's. Not his vision of what my life should be. Mine. The job search proved harder than anyone anticipated. Catherine applied to nonprofits, to educational foundations, to organizations doing work she believed in. The rejections piled up. Overqualified. One interviewer shook her head apologetically. We can't afford someone of your background, and honestly, you'd be bored within 6 months. Your experience doesn't really translate. Another rejection, this time from an education nonprofit. We need people who understand how to work within tight budgets. You're Catherine Monroe. This interviewer didn't even try to hide the skepticism. Why would you want to work here? Are you doing research on us or something? She came home deflated each time. They see the name and make assumptions. Either I'm too rich to need work, or I'm slumming it for some ulterior motive. No one sees me. Marcus listened, offered what comfort he could, but knew the frustration would have to work itself out. Some lessons couldn't be shortcut. The fight happened on a Thursday night. Marcus had come home tired from a long job, a commercial unit that needed complete overhaul. He found Catherine in the kitchen, frustrated from another rejection email. Maybe use a different name on the resume, he suggested. Your mom's maiden name, something that doesn't carry the Monroe weight. Catherine's expression hardened. That's who I am. I shouldn't have to hide it. It's not hiding. It's giving people a chance to see you before the assumptions kick in. Easy for you to say. The words came sharper than she intended. You've never had to pretend to be someone else, just to be treated like a person. Marcus felt his own exhaustion flare into anger. No, I've just had to work 60-hour weeks because your father decided to destroy my business. I've had to explain to my kid why we're eating rice and beans 3 nights a week. So maybe don't lecture me about having it easy. Silence stretched between them, ugly and charged. Catherine grabbed her keys. I need some air. She was gone before Marcus could respond, door closing with a controlled precision that somehow felt worse than a slam. Danny appeared in the hallway, worry written across his features. Marcus forced himself calm. It's okay, buddy. Adults fight sometimes. It doesn't mean anything's broken. But the words felt hollow even as he said them. Catherine returned after midnight. Marcus was still awake, sitting on the porch despite the cold, unable to sleep without knowing she was okay. She sat beside him, close but not touching. You're right. I've been thinking about it like I'm owed something. Owed respect, owed a chance. But nobody owes me anything. I have to earn it, same as everyone else. Marcus reached for her hand. I shouldn't have snapped. This is hard for both of us in different ways. The name thing. Catherine's voice went quiet. I've been holding on to it because it felt like the last piece of who I was. But maybe that's backwards. Maybe Catherine Monroe is who I was. Cat Riley, my mother's maiden name. Maybe that's who I'm becoming. She squeezed his hand. I'll update the resume tomorrow. The interview at Bridge Academy came 3 weeks later. Cat Riley, the application read, Development Coordinator position, nonprofit helping underprivileged kids access educational opportunities. Catherine wore clothes from Target, professional but affordable, and took the bus to avoid any car that might signal wealth. The interview lasted 2 hours, covered her background in deliberately vague terms, focused on what she could bring to the organization. She got the job. $52,000 a year, barely a rounding error in her former life, but earned entirely on her own merits. The first day terrified her. Regular office, regular people, regular expectations, no assistants to handle details, no family name opening doors, no assumption that she belonged. Just work, evaluated on its own terms. But the work itself, helping kids who'd never had chances get opportunities they deserved, ignited something Catherine hadn't felt in years. Purpose, meaning, the sense that her actions mattered beyond accumulating wealth. She came home energized, full of stories. This kid had gotten into a coding boot camp. That family had received scholarship funding. A teenager she'd been working with had been accepted to a college prep program. You're different, Marcus noticed after a few weeks. Lighter somehow. Catherine considered the observation. I'm tired all the time. The commute is annoying. I had to learn how to use a copy machine because there's no one to do it for me. She smiled. And I've never been happier. Is that strange? It's exactly right, Marcus told her. Work that matters is supposed to feel different than just filling time. The budget reality hit harder than anticipated. Catherine had lived her entire life without considering what things cost. Learning to operate differently required constant recalibration. The grocery store became a battlefield. Her first solo shopping trip produced organic everything, specialty items, imported goods, a $340 bill that made Marcus's eyes widen. That's supposed to last 2 weeks? He tried to keep judgment from his voice. Catherine flushed. I thought I was being careful. Danny intervened before it became a thing. It's okay, we can teach you. Dad couldn't cook when Mom died. He burned water once, true story. That's physically impossible, Catherine protested. You'd think so. Marcus managed a rueful grin, but I managed it anyway. They went shopping together after that. Marcus demonstrated the art of store brands versus name brands, weekly specials, planning meals around what was on sale. Catherine took notes on her phone like it was the most important information she'd ever received. The shift felt humiliating at first, someone who'd never worried about money learning to clip coupons. But it also felt liberating. Each small economy a declaration of independence from the world she'd left behind. Then the truck broke down. Marcus had known it was coming. The engine had been making sounds for months that suggested expensive failure. But when it actually happened, stranding him on the side of I-84 with a job waiting across town, the timing couldn't have been worse. The repair estimate came to $1,200. Money Marcus didn't have, not with rent coming due and Danny's dental appointment the following week. He started researching payment plans, calculating which bills could wait, whether he could borrow from Tommy without damaging his pride irreparably. Catherine fixed it without asking. Quietly paid the shop, texted Marcus that his truck was ready for pickup, didn't mention the money at all. Marcus found out from the mechanic who mentioned the nice lady who covered everything. He drove home with fury building, rational thought giving way to wounded ego. You paid for my truck? Catherine looked up from the book she was reading, Danny's head in her lap. He'd fallen asleep during their reading session. You needed it fixed. I didn't ask you to do that. I can handle my own. You were stressed about money. She kept her voice low to avoid waking Danny. I have money. The math seems simple. It's not about math. Marcus struggled to articulate the knot in his chest. It's about I need to feel like I'm contributing, like I'm not just some project you're maintaining. Every time you solve my problems with money, it reminds me that I can't. He stopped, the words getting tangled. Catherine gently shifted Danny's head to a pillow and stood. You can't what? Provide the way I should. Take care of my own family. Be enough without someone rescuing me. The admission hung between them, raw and painful. Catherine's expression shifted from confusion to understanding. I didn't mean it like that. I just saw a problem I could fix and... She stopped, recognition dawning. I just did exactly what my father does. Throw money at things instead of asking what people actually need. She sat down heavily. I'm so sorry. I didn't think about how it would feel. I'm so used to money being the solution that I forgot solutions need to be wanted. Marcus sat beside her, anger draining into something more complicated. I know you were trying to help, but I need to carry my own weight, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Does that make sense? It makes sense. Catherine's hand found his. I'll ask next time. We'll figure things out together. Partners. The word carried weight, not rescuer and rescued. Partners. Richard Monroe made his final move 6 months after cutting Catherine off. The knock came at 8 on a Saturday morning. Marcus opened the door to find a woman in a county uniform, clipboard in hand, expression professionally neutral. Mr. Reed, I'm Sandra Howe from Child Protective Services. We've received a report regarding your son's living situation. Marcus's blood went cold. What kind of report? I'm not at liberty to discuss the source, but we're required to investigate concerns about child welfare. May I come in? The inspection was thorough. Sandra Howe examined Danny's room, small but clean, decorated with space posters and model planets. She looked through the kitchen, the bathroom, checked smoke detectors and window locks, asked Danny questions with gentle professionalism. Do you feel safe here? Danny nodded vigorously. This is my home. Is there anything you want to tell me? Anything that worries you? Danny considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. Sometimes I worry Dad works too hard, and Kat burns dinner a lot, but mostly everything's good. Sandra made notes. Her expression revealed nothing. After she left, Marcus stood in the kitchen, hands shaking with rage. Danny had been sent to Mrs. Chen's, protected from the worst of what was happening. He's trying to take my son. The words came out barely controlled. Your father filed a CPS complaint to take Danny away from me. Catherine's face went white. I'll kill him. I'll actually kill him. What grounds could he possibly... Unstable living situation. Inappropriate relationship. Whatever lies he told them. Catherine grabbed her keys. I'm going to end this. Marcus caught her arm. Kat, wait. If you go in there angry, I should go in there angry. He's attacking a child to punish me. Danny didn't do anything except exist in a house I care about. Her eyes burned with fury Marcus had never seen. I've spent my entire life avoiding the confrontation with my father. Doing what he wanted, being who he demanded, that ends today. She drove downtown in the used Civic she'd bought after selling the Aston Martin. The Monroe Technologies Tower gleamed against gray Portland sky, 40 floors of glass and steel, monument to a man who'd built an empire and destroyed his family. The lobby security knew her, of course, waved her through despite her changed circumstances. The elevator to the executive floor felt like ascending to a battlefield. Her father's assistant tried to intercept. "Ms. Monroe, he's in a meeting." Catherine walked past without slowing. The office door opened under her hand, expensive wood giving way to reveal Richard Monroe behind a desk that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Two men in suits sat across from him, interrupted mid-conversation, whatever deal temporarily suspended by the intrusion. "Gentlemen, give us the room." The command in her voice surprised even her. The suits glanced at Richard, who nodded tersely. They gathered papers and left, door closing behind them. Father and daughter faced each other across territory he'd owned for decades. "This is unexpected." Richard leaned back, projecting calm. "I thought you'd given up pretending to be part of this world. Call off the CPS investigation." His expression didn't change. "I don't know what you're referring to." "Don't," Catherine's voice went sharp. "Don't insult us both by lying. You filed a complaint about Danny's living situation. Anonymous, of course, but we both know where it came from." Richard studied her with the cold assessment she remembered from childhood. That child deserves a stable environment, not exposure to your experiments in playing house with unsuitable men. "Unsuitable?" Catherine laughed, bitter. "Because he works with his hands? Because he can't be bought or intimidated? Because he treats me like a person instead of an asset? Because he's nothing." Richard's mask slipped, contempt showing through. "A blue-collar nobody who got lucky enough to catch your attention during a breakdown. He'll bore you within a year. They always do." "You don't know anything about him." Catherine stepped closer to the desk. "He's more of a man than anyone you've ever approved for me. He stands up when things get hard. He protects the people he loves. He's teaching his son that kindness matters more than conquest." Her voice steadied, something settling into certainty. "He's everything you're not, and that's why you can't stand it." Richard's jaw tightened. "You're throwing away everything I built for you, everything I sacrificed." "You sacrificed nothing for me." Catherine cut him off. "You sacrificed me for the company, for the empire, for the image. I was never your daughter. I was your product, and I'm done being sold." She leaned forward, palms flat on his desk. "Call off CPS or I go nuclear. Every bribe you've paid, every regulation you've skirted, every politician in your pocket. I have documentation going back 15 years, emails, recordings, financial records. I've been collecting them since I was 17, ever since I realized who you really were." Richard's composure cracked slightly. "You're bluffing." "Test me." Catherine's voice went cold. "You taught me to always have leverage, to never enter a negotiation without an exit strategy. Congratulations. You taught me well." Silence stretched between them. "What do you want?" Richard finally asked. "I want you to leave us alone. Marcus, Danny, me. No more attacks on his business. No more CPS complaints. No more whatever else you're planning. You pretend I don't exist, and I pretend the same about you. And if I refuse, then I become the biggest scandal this company has ever faced. I'll give interviews, write memoirs, testify before any committee that wants to hear what I know." Catherine straightened. "I'll burn it all down and smile while I do it. Your choice." Richard studied her for a long moment. This stranger wearing his daughter's face, speaking with authority she'd never shown before. "If you do this, you're no longer my daughter. No reconciliation, no inheritance, nothing." Catherine felt the weight of the words, the finality of closing a door that could never reopen. "I haven't been your daughter since I was 12, and you made me give away the only thing I love because it wasn't productive." She moved toward the door. "Goodbye, Richard." She walked out without looking back. The elevator down felt like descent from a world she'd never belonged in anyway. The CPS investigation closed within the week. No evidence of unsafe environment, the report concluded. Anonymous complainants' concerns unfounded. Marcus held her that night while she shook, the enormity of what she'd done finally hitting. You didn't have to burn everything down for us. Catherine pressed closer. Yes, I did. You're my family now, the only family that counts. Outside, rain fell on Portland in the way it always did, steady and cleansing, washing away what needed to go. The months following Catherine's confrontation with her father settled into something Marcus hadn't experienced since before Sarah's diagnosis. Ordinary life, mundane and precious. No crises demanding immediate response. No threats looming on the horizon. Just the daily rhythm of work and school and dinners together. The gradual accumulation of shared experience that turned strangers into family. Catherine's apartment in Laurelhurst became a second home. Danny kept a toothbrush there, a drawer of clothes, his favorite space books lined up on a shelf she'd installed specifically for him, and the walls collected evidence of their intertwined lives, photos from the coast trip they'd taken in spring, Danny's artwork from school, a framed copy of the Tribune article that had changed everything. Work at Bridge Academy consumed Catherine in ways her previous life never had. She rose through the organization quickly, promoted to assistant director after 8 months when her predecessor left for a position in Seattle. The salary increase to $68,000 felt like fortune, not because of the amount, which would have been pocket change in her former existence, but because she'd earned it through competence rather than connection. Her days filled with grant applications, donor meetings, program development. She learned to stretch budgets, to advocate for resources, to navigate bureaucracy without the shortcuts wealth had always provided. When a major foundation approved funding for their college prep initiative, Catherine celebrated with Marcus and Danny at their favorite pizza place, ordinary joy replacing champagne and galas. Marcus's business stabilized and then grew. Word of mouth spread. The HVAC guy who'd stood up to Richard Monroe, the working-class hero of that viral love story. New clients appeared steadily, enough that he hired Tommy Briggs full-time and started considering a second truck. The financial pressure eased, not disappeared. They'd never be wealthy by any reasonable standard, but softened into something manageable. Marcus stopped checking his bank account with dread, started putting money into savings again, small amounts that accumulated toward a future he was beginning to believe in. Danny thrived in the stability. His grades improved. He joined the school's astronomy club, came home bubbling with facts about quasars and neutron stars. The sad-eyed boy who'd pushed his father toward a dating app had transformed into something lighter, someone who laughed easily and trusted that good things could last. The anniversary of their meeting approached without fanfare. 18 months since a canceled blind date and a woman crying in a parking lot. Marcus found himself thinking about it more as the date neared, the improbability of their story, the strange alchemy that had turned disaster into something worth protecting. He started planning without telling anyone. Tommy covered extra shifts. Mrs. Chen agreed to watch Danny overnight. The ring, simple silver band, small diamond, cost $1,800, every penny from his savings account. Not the kind of jewelry Catherine had grown up with, but real in ways that mattered more. Danny figured it out, of course. The kid noticed everything. You're going to ask Kat to marry us, aren't you? The question came over breakfast, Danny studying Marcus with that too perceptive gaze. Maybe. Would that be okay with you? Danny considered the question with characteristic seriousness. She already feels like family. This would just make it official. It might change things. She'd be around all the time. Have a say in decisions about the house, about your life. Good. Danny shrugged like the matter was settled. She's better at cooking now, and she knows all the constellations, and she doesn't get weird when I talk about Mom. The last point carried weight. Other adults, teachers, neighbors, potential girlfriends Marcus had briefly dated before Catherine, often became uncomfortable when Danny mentioned Sarah. Changed subjects, offered awkward condolences, treated grief like something contagious. Catherine simply listened, asked questions, helped Danny keep his mother's memory alive rather than buried. Your mom would have liked her, Marcus said quietly. Danny nodded. I know. That's why I'm okay with it. The night Marcus chose was unseasonably clear for October in Portland, stars visible despite the city lights. He told Catherine he wanted to revisit somewhere significant, offered no other details. She dressed simply, jeans, a sweater she'd bought at a thrift store and wore constantly because it was the first piece of clothing she'd chosen without considering labels or appearances. The Civic needed gas. Marcus filled the tank while Catherine wondered aloud where they were going. The Bellevue restaurant had changed in 18 months. New owners, new name, same location overlooking the parking lot where everything began. Marcus pulled into the same spot where his headlights had first caught a woman crying beside an Aston Martin. "Why are we here?" Catherine's voice carried confusion and the beginning of understanding. She looked around the familiar lot, emptier now than that first night, most diners already gone home. Wanted to see if it felt different now. Marcus climbed out, walked to the spot where her car had been parked. Catherine followed, standing where she'd stood 18 months ago, barefoot and broken and believing she'd never fit anywhere. The silence stretched between them, comfortable rather than tense. October wind carried the scent of rain coming, distant and inevitable. "It feels like a different lifetime." Catherine's voice went soft. Like that was someone else entirely. Someone so convinced she didn't deserve happiness that she couldn't even walk into a restaurant. She turned to face him, city lights painting her features. "I was so lost that night. Had been lost for years without realizing it. Running from my father, running from myself, running from anything that felt real because real things could hurt you." Marcus closed the distance between them, took her hands. "Then you showed up." Catherine's eyes shimmered. "Some HVAC technician in a parking lot who saw me crying and didn't drive away. Who offered kindness without wanting anything. Who looked at me like I was a person instead of a problem to solve or an opportunity to exploit." "You weren't at your worst that night." Marcus kept his voice steady despite his pounding heart. "You were at your most real. That's the version of you I fell in love with. Not the polished heiress or the society princess. The woman who was brave enough to fall apart and let someone help pick up the pieces." He released one of her hands, reached into his jacket pocket. The ring box felt heavier than its size suggested, weighted with everything it represented. Catherine's breath caught. "This isn't fancy." Marcus opened the box, small diamond catching parking lot light. "Not like the jewelry you grew up with, but it's real, and it's paid for with money I earned, and it represents everything I am and everything I want to build with you." He watched her face as the words came, emotions chasing each other across her features. Surprise, fear, hope. "Catherine Monroe, will you marry a guy who fixes air conditioners for a living? Who lives in a house with stained carpets and a furnace that makes concerning sounds? Who comes with a 9-year-old son convinced that socks are a form of oppression and that if you travel fast enough, you can see the past?" The question hung between them, 18 months of building toward this moment. "Will you be part of our weird little family? Make it official? Help me raise this kid and maybe, someday, add to our collection of people who can't cook and believe in impossible things?" Catherine was crying, nodding before he finished speaking. "Yes, God, yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. Simple silver against skin that had once worn nothing but platinum and diamonds. She stared at it like it was the most precious thing she'd ever owned. Then she kissed him, there in the parking lot where everything began, where two broken people had stumbled into each other's lives and found something neither expected to deserve. "I love you." The words came against his lips. "I love your terrible dad jokes and your calloused hands and the way you make me feel like I'm enough exactly as I am. I love Danny and your cluttered kitchen and the life we're building together." Marcus pulled back enough to see her face. "We should probably tell Danny before he explodes from keeping the secret." Catherine laughed, wet and joyful. "He knew? He figured it out. Kid sees everything." They drove home with hands linked across the center console, the ring catching light every time Catherine moved. Danny was supposedly asleep when they arrived, but Mrs. Chen's knowing smile suggested otherwise. The boy appeared in the hallway approximately 3 seconds after the front door closed. "Did she say yes?" Catherine crouched to his level, held out her hand so he could see the ring. I said yes. Danny threw his arms around her with force that nearly knocked her over. I knew it. I knew you'd say yes. This is the best day. We're going to be a family now. Catherine's voice carried wonder. Official and everything. We were already family, Danny corrected, with the certainty of a child who understood things adults often missed. Now we just have paperwork. The wedding planning happened in fits and starts over the following months. Catherine wanted small, the opposite of everything her upbringing had prepared her for. No society pages, no designer gowns, no guest lists curated for political advantage. Just people who mattered, gathered somewhere meaningful. They settled on Washington Park's Rose Garden, the place where they'd walk during early dates while Danny ran ahead examining flowers. 40 guests, maybe 50. Friends and neighbors and colleagues who'd become something like family. The invitation list required careful navigation. Catherine's mother, Elaine Monroe, socialite and silent partner to her husband's cruelties, received a card that went unanswered. No other family remained on Catherine's side, a stark reminder of what wealth without love produced. Marcus's side offered more. Tommy Briggs as best man, despite his protests that he didn't own appropriate clothing. Mrs. Chen, who'd kept Danny alive in the early grief years and never asked for thanks. The Rodriguez family from down the street. Fellow HVAC technicians who'd worked alongside Marcus through the lean times. A grief support group leader Marcus had reconnected with after years of absence. Danny's role was never in question. Ring bearer, flower boy, best man, and officiant, if anyone would let him. He offered to fill all positions simultaneously. You can't marry yourself, Marcus pointed out. I could try, Danny countered. I'm very efficient. They hired a photographer willing to work within their budget. Catherine found a dress at a vintage shop. Tea-length lace, cream-colored, $400 instead of the $40,000 her mother would have expected. Marcus bought a suit rather than renting, something he could wear to other occasions, practical in ways that felt meaningful. The day arrived with Portland's typical October uncertainty, clouds threatening but holding, temperature cool enough for jackets without being cold. Catherine dressed at her apartment while Marcus and Danny prepared at the house, separated by tradition neither of them had grown up with but wanted to honor. Tommy arrived early, uncomfortable in borrowed clothes, carrying a flask he claimed was for emergencies. You nervous? Marcus considered the question while adjusting Danny's collar. No, should be probably, but mostly I'm just ready for this part to be over so we can start the next part. Tommy nodded like this made sense. Sarah would be proud of you. Moving on without forgetting. Not everyone manages that. The mention of Sarah brought the familiar ache, gentler now than it used to be. I think she'd like Kat. They're different, but something about the core, the way they both fight for what they believe in, even when it costs them. Danny looked up. Mom would definitely like Kat. She told me once that what matters is finding people who make you better. Kat makes both of us better. The ceremony site glowed with afternoon light filtered through clouds. Roses bloomed in October defiance, reds and yellows and oranges painting the garden. Chairs arranged in simple rows, no elaborate decorations beyond what nature provided. Guests gathered in clusters, the strange mix of two worlds learning to occupy the same space. Tommy looking uncomfortable next to Catherine's nonprofit colleagues. Mrs. Chen chatting with the Rodriguez grandparents. A few of Catherine's Bridge Academy families attending with their children. Evidence of the work that had given her purpose. Music started. Something classical Catherine had chosen, played through a Bluetooth speaker because a live quartet exceeded budget. Marcus took his position, Danny beside him clutching rings with the seriousness of nuclear launch codes. Then Catherine appeared at the end of the aisle, and everything else faded. She walked alone, no one to give her away because she wasn't property to transfer. The vintage dress caught light, lace, and history and beauty without pretension. Her face held joy so complete it was almost painful to witness. The expression of someone who'd expected to spend her life performing happiness and instead found the real thing. Marcus forgot the words he'd memorized, forgot the assembled guests, the camera recording everything, the elaborate plans they'd made. Only Catherine existed, walking toward him through a garden in October, choosing him when she could have had anyone. The officiant, a friend of Mrs. Chen's who'd been ordained online specifically for this occasion, kept the ceremony simple. Brief remarks about love and commitment, the choosing of each other through difficulty, the family they'd built from broken pieces. Then Danny stepped forward, unscripted. Can I say something? Catherine and Marcus exchanged glances. Danny hadn't mentioned wanting to speak. When Mom died, I was really scared that Dad would be sad forever, that we'd always feel like something was missing. Danny's voice carried clear across the garden, steady despite his age. Then Kat showed up, and at first I thought she was just someone new. But then I figured out she was the person Mom sent us. He looked at Catherine directly. You came to our house and didn't care about the stains or the mess or that Dad sometimes forgets to buy groceries. You learned to make terrible pancakes just so we could eat breakfast together. You listen when I talk about Mom like it's important instead of weird. His voice cracked slightly. Today you're officially family, but you've been family since the first time you read me a space book with different voices and didn't act like I was crazy for believing in wormholes. He turned to include both of them. Mom said real love is being brave enough to keep choosing someone even when it's hard. You keep choosing each other. That's how I know it's real. Silence held for a moment, heavy with emotion. Catherine wiped her eyes. Marcus felt his own threatening. Thank you, Danny. The officiant recovered first. I don't think anyone could say it better. Vows came next. Simple promises, nothing elaborate. Marcus spoke first. I promise to love you when you burn dinner and when you forget that budget exists. When you cry about things that seem small and when you fight battles that seem too big. I promise to see the woman in the parking lot, the real one, brave enough to fall apart, whenever you start believing you have to perform perfection again. Catherine's voice shook but held. I promise to love you when the furnace breaks and the bank account's scary and the world doesn't make sense. When Danny asks questions neither of us can answer and when grief shows up uninvited. I promise to keep showing up every single day because showing up is everything, and I finally understand that now. Rings exchanged. Catherine's simple band matching the engagement diamond. Marcus's plain gold. The officiant pronounced them married, and Marcus kissed his wife for the first time in that garden of roses while Danny cheered loud enough to startle birds. The reception that followed felt like a neighborhood party rather than a society event. Catering came from a local restaurant that owed Marcus for fixing their walk-in cooler. The cake was 3 tiers from a bakery that charged by the hour rather than the slice. Music played through speakers rigged up by Tommy, who turned out to have unexpected DJ opinions. Catherine danced with Danny first, his request honored without question. They swayed together to something slow, the 9-year-old's head against her shoulder, both of them grinning at Marcus across the dance floor. She's really my mom now, right? Danny asked loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Catherine's arms tightened around him. If you want me to be. I do. My first mom was the best, but I think hearts can have room for 2 if you stretch them enough. She kissed the top of his head, unable to speak. Later, after the cake and the toasts and Tommy's increasingly enthusiastic playlist choices, Catherine and Marcus found themselves alone at the garden's edge. The party continued behind them, laughter and music and the chaos of celebration, but for a moment they existed separately. Mrs. Reed, Marcus tested the name, has a ring to it. I'm keeping my work name at Bridge Academy. Kat Riley got hired there. Kat Reed would raise questions. She smiled. But yeah, Mrs. Reed, I never thought I'd have a name I actually wanted to keep. They stood watching their guests, their people, celebrating a union that shouldn't have worked but did anyway. What do you think happens next? Marcus considered the question. We go home. I carry you across a threshold like people do. We figure out sleeping arrangements, since my bed is too small for regular 2-person occupation. We wake up tomorrow married and deal with whatever that means. Catherine laughed. I meant more broadly, the future. What life looks like now. Same as it looked before, I think. Just more official. Work and school and dinners together. Helping Danny with homework. Keeping the house from falling apart. Ordinary stuff. Ordinary sounds perfect. Catherine leaned into him. I spent my whole life surrounded by extraordinary. Extraordinary money, extraordinary expectations, extraordinary pressure. Ordinary is what I was always missing. They returned to the party. Danny had commandeered the music, was attempting to teach the Rodriguez children a dance he'd apparently invented. Catherine got pulled into conversation with her Bridge Academy director. Marcus found himself fielding congratulations from clients he hadn't expected to attend. The evening wound down naturally. Guests departed with hugs and well wishes. Tommy stayed to help clean up, surprisingly sentimental after several glasses of champagne. Mrs. Chen took Danny home, giving the newlyweds privacy for their first night. The house felt different with marriage in it. The same cluttered kitchen, the same saggy couch, the same photos of Sarah watching from the walls. But something had shifted, a new layer of meaning added to familiar spaces. They lay in bed afterward, the kind of exhausted that followed big events. Catherine's head rested on Marcus's chest, her ring catching moonlight through the window. I was so scared in that parking lot. Her voice came quiet. Not just of the date, of everything, of being seen, of wanting things I didn't deserve, of believing happiness might be possible if I was brave enough to reach for it. Marcus stroked her hair. What changed? You, Danny, the way you both looked at me like I was already enough. She shifted to see his face. My whole life, I was never enough. Never smart enough, accomplished enough, profitable enough for my father. Never social enough, polished enough, compliant enough for my mother. Then suddenly there's this guy in a parking lot who sees me crying and thinks I'm worth helping anyway. Who doesn't want anything except to make sure I'm safe? I wanted plenty of things, Marcus admitted, just not the things you were used to people wanting. That was the difference, Catherine's fingers traced patterns on his chest. You wanted me, not my money or my connections or my family name, just the woman underneath all that. They slept eventually, tangled together in a bed that really was too small, uncomfortable in the best possible way. The year that followed proved ordinary as promised. Catherine's work at Bridge Academy expanded when grant funding allowed new programs. Marcus's business grew steadily, enough to justify that second truck he'd been considering. Danny discovered Robotics Club and added mechanical engineering to his list of future careers alongside astrophysicist. Challenges appeared without destroying anything. A plumbing emergency that flooded the basement. Danny's struggle with a bully at school, resolved through conversations rather than confrontation. Catherine's occasional grief over the family she'd lost, not mourning her father, but mourning the possibility of a father who'd been different. They learned each other's rhythms more deeply. Marcus discovered that Catherine needed alone time after difficult workdays, space to process without immediately discussing problems. Catherine learned that Marcus expressed love through action rather than words, that a fixed drawer or organized closet meant more than spoken affirmations. They fought sometimes, never about big things, usually about loading the dishwasher incorrectly or forgetting to mention schedule changes. The fights felt normal in a way that startled them both. Neither had experienced relationships where conflict didn't threaten annihilation. Richard Monroe remained absent. Whatever arrangement Catherine's confrontation had produced held firmly. No contact, no interference, no shadows from the world she'd left behind. Occasionally news reached them. Monroe Technologies acquiring a competitor, Richard appearing at some industry event, but it felt distant, irrelevant to their actual lives. A year after the wedding, Catherine started feeling strange. Fatigue she couldn't shake, nausea in the mornings, emotions swinging wildly between elation and tears. The pregnancy test confirmed what she'd begun to suspect. She showed Marcus that evening, unable to find words adequate to the news. He stared at the positive result, processing slowly. We're having a baby. We're having a baby. Catherine's voice shook. I know we didn't plan. The timing isn't. I'm still figuring out how to be a stepmother, and now. Marcus kissed her quiet. It's perfect. Unexpected. Terrifying, completely perfect. Danny will be thrilled. He's been asking about siblings since the wedding. Said his mom wanted more kids, but they ran out of time. Marcus's eyes glistened. This is something good. Something we made together. Catherine let herself believe it, let herself imagine a future beyond the one she'd expected. Not just wife and stepmother, but mother herself, creating life rather than inheriting it. Danny's reaction exceeded expectations. He asked approximately 40 questions about fetal development, announced that he would teach the baby everything about space, and immediately began redesigning his room to accommodate a future sibling. The baby can have the corner by the window, he explained. That's where starlight comes in best. Good for early astronomical education. The pregnancy progressed without complications. Catherine worked until her 8th month, finally taking leave when standing for hours became impossible. Marcus rearranged the second bedroom, once a cluttered office, into a nursery. Neighbors brought hand-me-down clothes and experienced advice. At night, Catherine sometimes caught Marcus watching her with an expression she didn't understand. Finally, she asked, "I keep thinking about Sarah." His voice came rough. How she wanted more children. How I'd imagined building a family with her. This was supposed to be our story. Catherine felt her heart crack. "Do you wish—" "No," he cut her off gently. "That's not what I mean. Grief is strange. It makes room for new happiness, but doesn't disappear. I'm thrilled about this baby, about our life, about everything we're building. And I still miss her. Both things are true." She took his hand, placed it on her rounded belly. "I think Sarah sent me to you. I know that sounds mystical or whatever, but Danny believes it, and sometimes I do too. Like she knew you needed someone and made sure you found her." Danny said that the night of the proposal. Marcus managed a watery smile. Kids either prophetic or reading way too much science fiction. "Maybe both." Catherine leaned into him. "Either way, I think she'd be happy. That you moved on. That Danny has someone else to love him. That this baby will have parents who know grief doesn't erase capacity for joy." The baby arrived in spring, a daughter with Catherine's eyes and Marcus's stubborn chin. They named her Rose, after the garden where they'd married, the flowers that bloomed in defiance of seasons. Danny declared himself chief sibling advisor immediately, taking responsibilities seriously. He monitored feeding schedules, tracked sleeping patterns, read astronomy books aloud because babies need early education. The house grew more chaotic. Sleep deprivation replaced ordinary tiredness. Catherine learned to breastfeed while reviewing grant proposals on her laptop. Marcus mastered diaper changes with the efficiency of someone who'd done it all before and remembered the tricks. Challenges multiplied with another person to care for. But so did moments of unexpected grace. Rose's first smile, Danny's pride when his sister gripped his finger, Catherine's wonder at creating life when she'd spent decades doubting her worth. 2 years after the wedding, they returned to the Bellevue parking lot one more time. The restaurant had new owners again, name changed, but the lot remained. Just Marcus, Catherine, and Danny this time. Rose stayed home with Mrs. Chen. "This is where you guys met?" Danny looked around skeptically. "Doesn't look very romantic." Marcus laughed. "It wasn't. Your stepmom was crying her eyes out. I was sad about getting canceled on. Everything was a mess. But you fixed it," Danny said with characteristic certainty. Catherine crouched to his level. "We fixed it together. That's the thing about broken things. Sometimes they're more beautiful after they heal because you can see where they were put back together." She pulled both of them into a hug, the three of them standing in the lot where everything changed. "Sometimes the person you're meant to find shows up exactly when you've stopped looking for them." Catherine's voice carried across the empty asphalt. "And sometimes," Marcus added, "they're crying next to an expensive car, hiding from their own life." Danny considered this with the seriousness of a child who'd lived through loss and emerged wiser than his years should allow. "And sometimes your dead mom sends you a new one because she knows you need someone to make you laugh again." The truth hung in the air between them, beautiful and painful and entirely real. Sarah had loved them enough to want Marcus happy after she was gone. Somehow, impossibly, he'd found that happiness with a woman who'd been running from everything he'd been running toward. "Your mom would have liked Kat." Marcus said it without hesitation now. "I would have liked her too," Catherine replied. "Anyone who raised a kid this wise must have been extraordinary." They stood together a moment longer. Three people who'd become family through luck and choice and the kindness of a man who'd seen someone crying and couldn't look away. Then Danny tugged at their hands with the impatience of youth. "Can we get ice cream now? I feel like we should celebrate not being sad in parking lots anymore." They piled into Marcus's truck, still the same F-150, now pushing well past reasonable mileage. The engine complained but held. They drove toward ice cream and home and the life they'd built from broken pieces. Behind them, the parking lot sat empty and ordinary, holding the ghost of a meeting that changed everything. Two lonely people who'd found each other at exactly the right time, in exactly the right way. Because sometimes the best love stories start with canceled plans and tears in parking lots. Sometimes what feels like an ending is really just the beginning of something better. And sometimes when you stop running and let someone see you at your most broken, that's when you finally find your way home. Catherine watched Portland slide past the window, her ring catching afternoon light, her family surrounding her. The woman who'd cried in that parking lot felt like a stranger now, someone she'd been once, someone she'd outgrown. She glanced at Marcus, steady at the wheel, at Danny in the back seat, already planning what flavor he wanted, at the life they'd built together, ordinary and extraordinary in equal measure. Happy? Marcus caught her looking. Catherine considered the question. All her life, happiness had been something to perform, smiling for cameras, pretending satisfaction, convincing the world she had everything anyone could want. Real happiness felt different, quieter, steadier, less about perfection and more about presence. Yeah, she said finally, I really am. They got ice cream at the place Danny preferred, where the servings were too large and the flavors too numerous. Sat outside despite the autumn chill because Danny insisted outdoor ice cream tasted better. Marcus's phone buzzed, work call, nothing urgent but unavoidable. He stepped away to handle it, leaving Catherine and Danny at the table. Can I ask you something? Danny's voice went serious. Catherine nodded. Do you ever miss your old life, the fancy houses and the money and all that? The question surprised her with its directness. She considered it carefully, giving Danny the respect of an honest answer. Sometimes I miss the convenience, being able to fix problems by throwing money at them. Never worrying about whether we can afford things. She stirred her ice cream, watching it melt. But that life came with a piece I couldn't see until I left. Loneliness. The feeling that everyone wanted something from me. The impossibility of knowing if people actually liked me or just liked what I could provide. She met Danny's eyes. What I have now, you're dead, you, 'cause this weird little family we've made, it's worth more than anything I gave up. Because it's real. Because people show up when things are hard, not just when there's something to gain. Danny nodded like this confirmed something he'd already suspected. That's what I thought. Mom used to say rich people sometimes forget that money can't buy the important stuff. Looks like your dad forgot that. He never learned it in the first place, Catherine said. That's the difference. Your mom knew what mattered. My father only knew what could be acquired. Marcus returned, pocketing his phone. Everything okay? Everything's perfect. Catherine reached for his hand, just talking about what matters. They finished their ice cream as the sun began its descent toward Portland's skyline. Danny's theories about interstellar travel filled the comfortable silence. Marcus's hand stayed linked with Catherine's across the table. Ordinary moments, ordinary life. The kind of thing Catherine had spent 32 years pretending she didn't want because wanting it seemed like weakness. Now it felt like the only thing worth having. They drove home as darkness settled, city lights flickering to life. The house waited for them, small and cluttered and imperfect, filled with everything that mattered. Mrs. Chen met them at the door, Rose sleeping against her shoulder. The baby stirred at familiar voices, settled again when Catherine took her. Good day, Mrs. Chen asked. Catherine looked around at her family, Marcus already heading to check the furnace that had been making sounds again, Danny running to his room to finish a robotics project, Rose warm and solid in her arms. The best kind, she said, the ordinary kind. Chen smiled like she understood everything those words contained. She gathered her things and left with promises to return for babysitting whenever needed. Evening settled into routine. Dinner from leftovers because no one felt like cooking. Homework battles with Danny over math problems he could solve but didn't want to show work for. Rose's feeding and changing and the particular exhaustion of caring for new life. Later, with both children asleep, Catherine and Marcus sat on the porch despite the cold. Stars visible between clouds, the neighborhood quiet. I was thinking about the first night, Marcus said, when I almost drove away. Catherine leaned against him. What stopped you? Honestly, I don't know. Some combination of guilt and curiosity and Sarah's voice in my head telling me to be kind even when it was easier not to be. He paused. I almost talked myself out of it. Almost decided you were someone else's problem. Would have been simpler. Simpler, Catherine agreed. And worse, for both of us. I think about it sometimes. The version of my life where I drove away. Where you went back to your penthouse and I went home to frozen pizza and we never saw each other again. He shook his head. That version of me would still be surviving, not living. That version of me would have gone back to my father eventually. Catherine's voice went quiet. I was running out of strength to resist. You gave me something to fight for. They sat in silence, letting the weight of alternate histories fade. Do you believe in fate? Catherine asked eventually. Marcus considered the question. I believe in choices. I chose to get out of my truck. You chose to stay instead of running. We keep choosing each other every day. Maybe fate puts people in the same parking lot, but we're the ones who decide what happens next. Philosophy from the HVAC guy. I contain multitudes. He kissed her temple. Come on. It's cold and we both have early mornings. They went inside, locked up, checked on both sleeping children. The house settled around them, full of life and love and the accumulated weight of a family built from unlikely pieces. In bed, Catherine watched moonlight trace patterns on the ceiling. Marcus? Thank you for not driving away. He pulled her closer, his answer a promise spoken against her hair. Thank you for letting me stay. And in the darkness of a house in southeast Portland, in a life neither of them had expected to build, two people who'd found each other in a parking lot let ordinary happiness carry them into sleep. Because sometimes broken things heal stronger. Sometimes the hard thing and the right thing are the same. And sometimes the people who seem most lost are just waiting for someone brave enough to offer them a hand.